All right. Hey, everyone. Amy for the UPSC. You know who you are. It's time to get down to business with one of those make-or-break topics. How healthy are the finances of Indian states?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not always the most exciting subject, but you can bet the UPSC examiners want to see that you get it.
And we're going deep, using the 2025 Fiscal Health Index, the FHI, like our guidebook.
I like that, a guidebook.
Think of it as like a financial report card, for 18 major states, all covering fiscal year 2023-23.
And the cool thing is it's not just numbers, right? It's like the story behind the numbers are states spending smart, getting enough revenue, not drowning in debt.
Exactly. And all of that, trust me, it's pure gold for your economics answers in the mains exam.
Oh, yeah, big time.
So the report breaks everything down into 5 key areas like quality of expenditure, revenue mobilization, fiscal prudence.
That index, and then, of course, whether that debt's sustainable.
Right. Those are the pillars of strong finances for anyone, really. But let's get to the good stuff. This year's FHI had some winners that nobody expected. Who aced the test?
Okay, so the top spot, Odisha, snagged a score of 67.8. Pretty impressive.
Odisha, wow. That's not who I would have guessed. But their debt management's really good, and they're putting money into things that'll pay off later, capital expenditure.
Exactly, and that's part of why their fiscal deficit's so low. That's like how much more the government's spending than it takes in.
And a low one is good, obviously, but I bet a lot of folks studying for the UPSC might not get WHY that matters so much. Could you break that down for us?
Sure. Basically, a low fiscal deficit, it means the government is being careful, not spending wildly more than they're earning, and that helps keep things like, inflation down.
Makes sense.
Interest rates, too, and all of that makes it way easier for businesses to do well, invest, create jobs, and boom, you've got a healthier economy.
See, that's the kind of connection I'm talking about. Okay, Odisha's at the top. Who else impressed the FHI folks?
Second place, we've got Chhattisgarh, and their revenue growth is strong, probably because of all that mining they do.
Yeah, natural resources can be a huge plus, but there's always a but, right?
There is. It's great if you've got them, but you can't get too dependent on just one thing.
Right, like if the price of whatever you're mining drops, suddenly the whole state budget's in trouble.
Exactly. Got to diversify. Chhattisgarh's doing great now, but for the long haul, they got to branch out, not put all their eggs in one basket.
It's a classic UPSC theme, that balance, right?
Yeah.
So who's got the bronze medal in fiscal fitness?
Okay, third place, Goa. And they're the kings of getting that revenue.
Yeah.
Super efficient at collecting taxes, plus all that non-tax stuff, tourism fees,
Go taxes.
Yeah.
And I guess surprising. But it's a great example of how a state can get creative, go beyond just the usual income taxes.
Exactly.
I bet our listeners are already thinking about this whole fiscal federalism thing, right? How much power do states have over their own money versus what the central government controls?
Oh, for sure. That's a huge topic in the UPSC.
It's all connected. But we got to be real. The FHI also showed us that some states are struggling. It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah, and that's where the report gets even more useful. It's like it pinpoints where things are going wrong so you can fix them.
So who's having a tough time?
Punjab, Kerala, West Bengal, they all pop it up as having trouble with debt sustainability, meaning basically, can they keep up with paying back what they owe? And then revenue mobilization, some of them just aren't bringing in enough cash.
Okay, that's worrying, but why should our listeners care? What's the impact?
Imagine a state, right? They have to borrow more and more money just to cover their everyday costs.
Uh-oh.
That's what happens when debt gets out of control. And then suddenly a huge chunk of their money is going just to interest payments, not to education or healthcare or anything that actually helps people.
Like a vicious cycle, it just gets worse.
Exactly. It can tank the economy, lower everyone's standard of living. It's bad news.
This is exactly why understanding these topics is so important for the UPSC. It's not just theoretical. It affects real people.
Absolutely. It's real world stuff.
Okay, we've talked about the winners, the ones who need some help. Let's zoom in on those 5 parts of the FHI, those sub-indices. First up, quality of expenditure. What stands out there?
What's interesting is how differently states choose to spend their money. Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, they're putting a lot into the social sector, like health and education.
Smart move. Got to invest in people.
Exactly. That's a long-term strategy, build up your workforce.
Yeah.
But then you've got places like Punjab and Rajasthan, not enough money going into capital expenditure,
Which means,
not building enough infrastructure, roads, bridges, that kind of thing.
so you've got one approach focused on people, the other maybe missing out on those big projects.
Yeah, and the UPSC could totally ask you to compare them. What does each approach mean for economic growth? That's the kind of thinking they want to see.
Awesome. Okay, next sub-index revenue mobilization. How are states getting the money they need?
All sorts of ways. Odisha, Goa, and Chhattisgarh, they're getting creative, finding non-tax revenue, things like mining royalties or money from businesses the state owns.
Like diversifying their income.
Smart.
Right. And it makes them less vulnerable. If one thing goes bad, they've got others to fall back on. But then you've got states like Bihar, West Bengal. They're still super dependent on what the central government gives them.
Which can be risky, right?
Totally. You're kind of at the mercy of whatever the central government decides. And that's, again, fiscal federalism, a key topic for the UPSC.
This is why we go deep. It's all connected. Okay, how about fiscal prudence? Sounds kind of intimidating.
It's not really. It just means being responsible with money. Don't spend more than you have. Try to avoid borrowing too much. Keep things balanced, like a good budget, you know?
Whether it's for a whole state or just me.
Exactly. And we've got some states that are doing it right. Odisha, Jharkhand, their deficits are low, meaning they're not spending like crazy. But then you've got Kerala and Andhra Pradesh running revenue deficits. That's when you spend more than you earn consistently. Yeah. Not good. Okay, 2 more to go. Got to talk about debt. First, the debt index.
Right. So that one, it basically looks at how much debt a state has compared to how much their economy is producing. Like, is their debt a small or big chunk of their overall GDP?
GDP, gross state domestic product.
Oh.
Our listeners need to know that one. So the lower the debt compared to the GDP, the better, right?
Right. It means they can handle their debt, their economy is strong enough to pay it back. And in that category, Maharashtra and Gujarat are looking good. Their debt to GDP is pretty low. But Punjab and Haryana, their debt's growing faster than their economy.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and that can really limit what they can do. Like, they can't invest as much in infrastructure or social programs, which hurts the economy even more. And then it's even harder to pay back the debt. It's a mess.
It all comes back around. It's all connected. Last one, debt sustainability. What's the key idea there?
It's not just about how much debt you have. It's about whether you can handle it long term, you know? Like, is your economy growing faster than the interest payments are piling up?
So if you're growing faster, you're good.
Exactly. Means you're making enough money to pay off the debt without cutting back on other important stuff. And Odisha and Chhattisgarh, they're doing great on that front. But West Bengal and Punjab, their debt's growing faster than their economies, which means more and more of their money is going just to interest.
That doesn't sound sustainable at all. This is exactly why understanding these nuances is so important for anyone prepping for the UPSC.
Absolutely. The examiners will want to see that you get these connections, that you can analyze the situation, maybe suggest some solutions, you know.
This is gold. All right, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive into the Fiscal Health Index. We've looked at the winners, the states that need some extra attention, and all those 5 sub-indices that really show us what's going on.
But we're not done yet.
Stay tuned for part 2, folks, where we'll unpack the FHI's recommendations and connect all of this to bigger economic policies and those UPSC themes you got to know.
Can't wait. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're ready for more deep diving into the Fiscal Health Index, because this report, it's not just about grading states. It's also like giving them tips on how to improve.
It's like a financial coach. And for anyone aiming for the UPSC, this is where it gets really interesting, seeing how those recommendations connect to the bigger picture of economic policies.
Exactly. That's the kind of analysis the examiners love.
Okay, so let's break it down. What does the report say states need to focus on?
4 big things. Diversifying their revenue, making sure capital expenditure is a priority, managing their debt wisely, and being transparent about it all.
Okay, we've touched on these, but let's go deeper. Revenue diversification, why is that so important?
Imagine a state that gets most of its money from just one industry, right? Like, let's say, tourism. Then something happens, maybe a global pandemic, and suddenly...
No more tourists.
Exactly. And the state budget's in a free fall. That's why you got to have multiple sources of income. It's about spreading the risk.
Makes total sense. But what can states actually do to diversify? I'm sure our listeners are wondering about the practical steps.
So many options. Property taxes can be a good one, or user fees for, like, public transportation, or even income from businesses that the state itself owns.
Ah, so thinking outside the box, not just relying on the usual taxes. That's a good tip for our listeners writing their UPSC answers. Show that you get the practical side of things. Okay, so diversify those income streams. What about capital expenditure? Why should states be putting money into infrastructure?
Because it pays off big time in the long run. Think about it, good roads, bridges, power plants, those are the things that help businesses thrive, create jobs, boost the whole economy.
Yeah, it's investing in the future, right? But those big projects, they cost a lot up front.
They do. You need a government that's willing to think long term, not just about the next election.
And this is where those national schemes come in, right? Like the National Infrastructure Pipeline or Bratmla, all those big initiatives we've talked about.
Absolutely. And understanding how those schemes work, how they affect state budgets, that's classic UPSC territory.
Okay, debt management. Can't avoid that one. What are some smart strategies for keeping debt under control?
Well, it starts with not borrowing more than you can handle, right? Having solid fiscal policies, making sure you're paying back what you owe on time. And there are some cool tools out there like debt restructuring or issuing bonds to raise capital.
It's like personal finance, but for a whole state. Don't spend more than you earn.
Exactly. And the key is balance. Borrow enough to invest in development, but not so much that it cripples you later.
Makes sense. Last one, transparency. Why is that so important?
Because it builds trust. People need to see where their money's going, right? States should be open about their budgets, their spending, their debt, make it easy for anyone to find that information.
So everyone can hold the government accountable.
Exactly. It's about good governance, and that's another key theme in the UPSC syllabus for sure.
Okay, those 4 recommendations, they're like a roadmap for states to get their finances in shape.
And what's cool is how they connect to so many other economic policies, things that UPSC examiners love to ask about.
It's all connected. Okay, before we move on, quick reminder for everyone listening, if you're finding this deep dive helpful, hit that subscribe button and give us a like. It helps us reach more aspiring civil servants, just like you. Now let's get specific. How are these recommendations playing out in different states? Okay, so we've laid the groundwork, talked about what makes a state's finances strong, and even gotten some expert advice from the FHI on how they can level up. But now, I want to see those recommendations in action.
Right. Let's see how those ideas actually work out in the real world.
Let's start with revenue diversification, finding all those different income streams so you're not relying on just one thing. Any states knocking it out of the park in this area?
Oh, for sure. Odisha, remember them? Top of the class in fiscal health.
Yeah, they were impressive.
Well, a big part of that is how good they are at diversifying their revenue. They're bringing in money from all sorts of things, not just the usual taxes, mining royalties, income from businesses the state runs, you name it.
So they really took that don't put all your eggs in one basket advice to heart.
Yeah, and it's working. They're less dependent on any one source of income, which makes them a lot more stable if, something unexpected happens.
That's a great example for our listeners to use in their UPSC answers. Show the examiners that you understand how this stuff works in practice.
Absolutely. Real-world examples are always a good thing.
Okay, so Odisha's the diversification champ. What about capital expenditure? Any states really going all in on infrastructure?
Telangana's doing a great job. They're putting serious money into things like irrigation systems, power grids, making sure their transportation networks are top-notch.
Long-term thinking.
Exactly. And it's already creating jobs, boosting their economy. Plus, it sets them up for success way down the line.
And all of this ties back to those national infrastructure programs, right? Like, it all works together.
Yep, that's the kind of connection the UPSC loves to see, how national initiatives play out on the state level.
Okay, how about debt management? Who's doing it right, keeping things under control?
I'd say Maharashtra's a good role model. They've got a really clear system for how much they can borrow, how they're going to pay it back, and how they're managing the risk.
Smart.
It's like a giant state-sized budget. They're still borrowing because sometimes you need to do that to invest in growth, but they're doing it carefully so they don't end up in trouble later.
Yeah, don't want to end up drowning in debt. Okay, last one, transparency. Making sure the government's books are open for everyone to see. Who's the shining example here?
Andhra Pradesh has really stepped up their game on this one. They've made it super easy for anyone to find their budget documents, see where the money's going, and track their debt levels.
Awesome. More transparency is always a good thing.
It's about building trust, making sure the government's accountable to the people. And that, of course, ties back to the whole idea of good governance, a key theme in the UPSC syllabus.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. What makes a state's finances strong, what they can do to improve, and even seen some real-world examples of how it all works. I feel like I've learned so much about how India's economy ticks.
It's fascinating stuff, right? And for everyone out there prepping for the UPSC, remember, it's not just about memorizing a bunch of facts. It's about understanding the big picture, how everything connects, and being able to explain it clearly and analyze different situations.
And the Fiscal Health Index, it's the perfect tool for doing just that.
It's a treasure trove of information.
All right, that wraps up our deep dive into the Fiscal Health Index. We hope you all found it helpful and maybe even a little bit exciting.
We sure did.
As always, if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. It helps us reach more future civil servants just like you.
We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a topic that's sure to be on the UPSC exam, so stay tuned.
Until then, keep studying, keep asking questions, and best of luck with your UPSC journey.